Welcome to our webinar on comparative world literatures. It is our honor to have Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am. Welcome ma'am. And I'm really thrilled to introduce our esteemed speakers, Professor Gopa Nayak ma'am and Mr. Chaitali Sengupta ma'am, who will be sharing their thoughts and perspectives on comparative world literatures today. Welcome to both of you ma'am. And comparative world literatures brings together diverse literary traditions and culture and perspectives, global voices and narratives. And over the next few minutes, we will delve into the intersections and innovations that find this way. And so, um, without any delay, I must say that it is my great pleasure to introduce the Vice Chancellor of the University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu, who is a distinguished academician and remarkable academic career. She previously led the School of Foreign Languages at IGNOU University, and she has authored 23 books, making her a best-selling author at Amazon. Her academic excellence by double gold medals in both graduation and post-graduation. She has received the prestigious Literary Award Gold Medal from the Honorable Vice President of India for her contributions to English studies. And recently, her accolades include the Michael Madhusudhan Academy Award and the Lifetime Achievement Award in the year 2024. Her latest book, Medusa, has been published by Black Eagle Books. Her research spans new literatures, critical theory, folklore, and culture studies, Hindi studies, Indian knowledge systems, comparative world literature, children's literature, and American literature too. And now, without any delay, I would request Honorable Vice Chancellor, ma'am, to deliver her inaugural speech. Ma'am.
Yes, a very good morning to all of you. Uh, I'm very glad to have two eminent speakers in front of us as our, speakers in the comparative world literature series introduced by the Hindi University West Bengal. Both of them have been doing seminal work. They have been contributing their signature texts and research activities to world literature. That's how they fit into this series. And coming to them individually, Professor Gopa, I have a very long association with her. I think since 2 decades or so. I don't even remember when we met for the first time because it's like we have been meeting every day virtually. Professor Gopa has contributed important chapters and research to many of the IGNOU academic programs that I designed when I was a professor of English in IGNOU. She has contributed chapters on translation studies, on Bhasha literatures, on folk literature, on American literature. So, I mean, varieties of subjects. She has contributed chapters, and they were very important. They have got a lot of accolades, the chapters that the research that she has contributed to my work, my collaboration with me. And coming to her personal research and creative writing, yes, she has been doing excellent work. Some very interesting books from Odia literature she has translated. And I remember one of her books after the Kumbh Mela, she has written a very interesting coffee table book, which is one of the most popular books if you can Google that, right, Gopa? And any day I have any new idea to design a course, to do a book or anything, Gopa is the first person who I would like to call and share my ideas with her, and she never says no to my kind of research or contributing something to me. So personally, she has been an integral part of my life, and professionally, academically, she has been doing excellent work, seminal work. I welcome you, Gopa, on my personal behalf and on behalf of Hindi University to deliver this lecture today. We are proud and happy to have you. And coming to Chaitali, uh, as I would say that no one has recommended her to me, I found her. I discovered the important work she has been doing. I saw her on the internet. I noticed her seminal contributions, her work, and today she would be speaking a little bit on translation and also some of her important books which have created ripples in academia. And Chaitali is a very popular face in Indian literature and in diaspora literature. Whenever there is any discussion on diaspora studies or Indian writing in English or translation studies, English studies, and now I got to know that she is teaching Dutch in Netherlands. So such important things she has been doing. Her contributions will be remembered forever. While I congratulate Chaitali for the important work that she has been doing in world literature and language studies, I am very happy and privileged to invite her to be an integral part of this YouTube series from Hindi University. We call it Hindi University Special Lecture Series on Comparative World Literatures. And for the information of both Gopa and Chaitali, I would like to put a few things on record today. How and why do we do this kind of a lecture series? This morning, somebody messaged me from JNU that we are trying to use your YouTube series of comparative world literature from Hindi University in our classrooms. And I was very glad to hear that. This is the 12th lecture, and you both are, I think, 34th and 35th speakers. Within 4 months of my 5 months, 5 months of my stay in the university, I'm just 5 months old here. So
Hmm.
within these 5 months, almost 33 people, including the two of you, have spoken, and our lecture series has created ripples again in Indian academia. People are noticing it. People are taking those our YouTubes to their classrooms. They are making their students listen to your kind of eminent scholars, which would have been rather difficult for them to take you to their classrooms. So, in the smart classrooms in the country today, in the convergence mode of face-to-face and online and distance education, you people have started playing a seminal role. Now, these lectures of Hindi University lecture series, they are becoming a part of history. In future, when probably we will not be there, but these lectures will be useful. They will stay for the students and they will continue to learn from your research and your activities, your creative writing. So, with that sense of pride and sense of dignity of the Hindi University, I would also let you know a couple of research questions that we have in our mind when we introduce this kind of a lecture series. The first question that came to our mind in the month of January when we had a brainstorming with the students and with the teachers of in the university, they talked a lot about translation studies. We have a department of translation studies, department of Hindi, we have department of history and of political science, and the teachers are very well published. The students are very serious about what they are doing, and then they discussed their interests with me, and we thought, how can we build a plural multilingual canon vis-a-vis Bhasha literatures and translation studies. That is when we thought that let's do something on comparative world literature and introduce new departments on comparative world literatures. And that is when we thought about, introducing this lecture series. And the ethics of translation and the politics of equivalence. This has always been an important point when it comes to comparative literature. I think both of you, or at least Chaitali, since she's going to talk about translation, so probably she can take it up and maybe give us a idea about the politics of equivalence in literary translations vis-a-vis world literary texts, and then the critical questions like how does comparative literature handle texts that resist translation. There can be some texts that may resist translation, so how does comparative literature handle that? If it is not translation, can it be transcreation? Can it be transliteration? The politics has to be handled by somebody. Then why not writers like you? And then should translatability be a criterion for expanding the canon? Is everything translatable? We thought about that. So we make it open for scholars like you to answer to our questions or maybe to introduce your interesting and original ideas to our students and faculty. Then another question that we have is, does comparative literature risk flattening cultural difference under the rubric of world literature? So that is a very, very important question. And the institution of comparative literature, uh, under that canon, do we have the ideas like global south versus global north? be it India or be it the world. So, with these things in our mind, these debates in our mind, we introduced this kind of a series, and we are very fortunate to have the best brains in the country. If you go to our YouTube series, you will find most eminent people in the country vis-a-vis English studies and Hindi literature and comparative literature, folk literature, tribal studies, oral studies have already spoken for us. And I feel especially privileged. And personally, I am grateful that whoever I invite in the country, they always say yes to me. Probably because I have been working with them, or maybe they understand the importance of this series, or maybe they are excellent contributors in their own capacity. Whatever be the matter, but whoever I have invited, they have always accepted. And once again, we welcome both of you. And I hand it over to Paramita now to introduce the eminent speakers and start the business part. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I must say I am really delighted to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Chaitali Sengupta, who will deliver her lecture focused on world literature and the role of translation, a journey across thresholds. Chaitali Sengupta is a distinguished writer, academic, journalist, and translator. Her latest book, The Crossings Poems on War, Migration, and Survival, was recognized as a runner up at the London Book Festival in the year 2024. Her work as a translator bridges Indian and Dutch cultures, bringing notable authors from both traditions to a broader audience. Her current project, translating the works of Dutch author Louis Koffers into English, has received the praise in both the Netherlands and India, highlighting her role in fostering cross-cultural literary connections. Now, I would request Mr. Chaitali Sengupta for a very, very knowledgeable lecture. Ma'am, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paramita. And good morning from the Netherlands, all of you, my dear friends. It's an honor to speak today about something which is deeply personal and yet globally very relevant. The role of translation in shaping world literature, comparative literature. Translation to me is not simply a linguistic exercise. It is an act of cultural crossing. I would define it like that. It is a kind of a silent bridge, I would say, that allows readers to step into the landscape of other souls. I would like to speak a little bit about my own translation journey, although Nandini has also spoken so nicely and so well about what I have been doing. Thank you so much for the kind words. My journey as a translator has been a journey across many cultures and many centuries, I must say. And I consider it to be a passage through time, space, and also through literary consciousness. So it began with translating an English anthology of 12 short stories by prominent Indian authors drawn from both Bengali and Hindi/Urdu literary traditions. This collection, I have the copy with me here. This collection is called Timeless Tales in Translation. And this collection brought together voices like Sharnakumari Devi, one of India's earliest women writers, Rabindranath Tagore, Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, with his very sensitive portrayals of social dilemmas. In this book, I also translated a very, very touching story by Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. And the book also had two works by Munshi Premchand, the father of Hindi and Urdu realism. Alongside them were masters like Jaishankar Prasad, Sadat Hasan Manto, and each of them offered a lens into the emotional, moral, and political complexities in India. So the book is a diverse one. And what united these diverse stories was not only their literary brilliance, but the era they emerged from. So if you look at the stories, if you look at the authors, you will see that 100-year arc from 1855 to 1955. That was a time of colonial struggle, reformist zeal, and very introspective storytelling. So while I was translating these brilliant authors, through their words, I found myself translating not only language, but also the pulse of the subcontinent in transition during that period, during that arc of 1855 to 1955. And between these works, I turned my attention also to Tagore's lesser known works like Lipika, which is a collection of prose poems, and you can say a kind of philosophical miniatures, and also selected pieces from his poetry work Konika, which also captures poetic subtlety in miniature form. So these pieces, the Konika and Lipika, these are not widely read as Gitanjali, and reveals a side of Tagore that is kind of experimental and deeply introspective. So this work has not yet been published. This is currently awaiting publication. But in this year, January, my first English translation of 2 Dutch books by Louis Couperus, one of the greatest Dutch authors of his time, a stalwart of European literature, was published. This book is published by Penprints Publications in India, a publication house that is dedicated to nurturing translations and encouraging cross-cultural dialogue. In fact, it was very difficult for me to find a publisher for Couperus in India because, he is not so much known outside the Netherlands, and it was Penprints who welcomed his work. So I'm very grateful to Penprints as a publishing house. And translating Couperus has expanded not just my capacity as a translator, but also my sense of how literature mirrors the universal human condition. No matter where it is written, no matter in which geography it is written, this was something which I once again discovered while translating Couperus. So it is therefore after a lot of thinking that I chose today's topic for today's talk show, this webinar, which is so powerful and so important. And the topic, like Paramita has already said, world literature and the role of translation, a journey across thresholds. And my talk today would include the following aspects: the idea of world literature, translation as a space of transformation, what Nandini was saying, the role of translator, and are all translations or are all books translatable? So balancing fidelity and creative balance in translation. So I would briefly speak about these topics. What is world literature? World literature, as I see, it is not only a grand bookshelf. It is not only a grand bookshelf lined with the best books from every country. It is, the way I see it is, it is a space where living conversation happens. It is a space, a shared space, where this conversation is constantly evolving. It is a space where voices from vastly different geographies, histories, and also sensibilities can speak to one another and also to us across boundaries that would otherwise divide. So I often think about a space where Dante would sit beside Kalidas, or Virginia Woolf might echo ideas into our own Mahashweta Devi. And in the same way, Louis Couperus may whisper his fascination about realism and symbolism to the readers of Tagore or Premchand. But such a conversation can only happen such a conversation is only possible through literary translation. Without literary translation, just imagine Tagore would be just another voice in Bengal. His spiritual, lyrical universality would just be trapped in one language. And in the same way, Couperus would always be remained locked in the Hague, and his mystical insights will be known only to those people who can read and understand Dutch. Same way, Premchand's burning social realism will never reach anyone beyond the Hindi Urdu heartland. So, as I see it, literary translation becomes a passport. It becomes a passport that allows you to travel to other literary boundaries. And so, with this literary passport, a student or a person sitting in maybe Brazil feels the ache of Tagore's poetry or the Tagore's characters in Kolkata. Or that is what that allows a person or a student in Tokyo to encounter the moral dilemmas of the 19th century Amsterdam, let us say. So it is in this way that literary translation becomes a borderless dialogue. So so I can also say this way that it is literary translation is not merely the act of converting words, because people have this idea that a person, if he or she knows two different languages very well, that person can always translate. But it is not merely the act of converting words from one language to another. It is rather a very dynamic process of cultural negotiation, aesthetic reinterpretation, and also the recognition of identity. So this space of transformation, which Nandini was talking about in her opening words, this is in this space of transformation where meaning, context, these all starts shifting, and that becomes a fertile ground for both recreating literary heritage across the linguistic boundaries and also to preserve. This is also a way of preserving the world literature. And the reason is also very simple, because every word in a literary text is actually a treasure of meaning. Because these meanings are not fixed. A word or a phrase in any language, it carries a kind of a cultural, historical, emotional, and also sometimes political connotations. That I also found when I was translating Couperus from Dutch into English. So this shift from one language to another is not only linguistic, but there are other shifts that are happening very silently, but very powerfully. So I will give you one example. When I translated the story, I think I translated 2 stories by Sharna Kumari, and also the stories of Tagore, Premchand, and Manto. It was not only the words that I was taking into consideration. I also had to make decisions about grammar, about the cultural nuances, and the ideological framing, how these authors have framed the ideology that they wanted to take forward. So, how does one carry the quiet irony of Tagore's prose, miniatures in Lipika, or the layered emotion in Sharat Chandra's moral dilemma into another language without losing essence? The same complexity I found when I was translating Couperus into English. For all those who do not know the way Couperus wrote, I will just very briefly speak a little bit about his writing style and his prose, so that you can understand the point that I am trying to make. So Couperus's prose is very rich. It's very elegant, but it is also very stylistically ornate. The words and phrases are psychologically deep, and um, often layered in mysticism and symbolism. So in Across the Luminous Thresholds and Other Stories, here is the book. I can also show you the cover of the book, this one. As I said, it was published by Pen Prints. The threshold in this book is both literal and also spiritual. And translating it meant for me to enter into a philosophical conversation between the two literary cultures, the Dutch thoughts and the contemporary English readership. So translation, this is just an example to say that translation is not merely a bridge between the two texts, but it is also a space where transformation happens. And this is what makes comparative literature possible. But then I come to the next point, or the next aspect of my speech today, of my talk today. And at this point of our discussion, probably it is very important and crucial to acknowledge the often invisible, I call it the invisible hand or the presence of the translator. To faithfully serve a source text, the translator, I believe, must inhabit that space I was talking about, the space between languages and between cultures. And it is within this liminal transitional space that the translator has to operate. And it is precisely here that comparative literature discovers its most authentic expressions. So, what kind of hurdles a translator must overcome in transfer and transmission of literary works across the national borders are very significant. It is surely not possible that the translated version becomes just a mirror of the original text. That never happens. And as a translator, I believe that is also not where our aim should be. That is not the aim that as a translator we should be having. The reason is language is not only just a career, not only a system of words, but it is also a career of culture, history, emotion, worldview, everything together. So a word which is, kind of embedded in a specific linguistic and cultural context, every word, in fact, and when moved into another language, it undergoes a subtle but inevitable transformation. Let us put it that way. So the role of the translator, therefore, he or she is positioned in this in-between space, the liminal space. And he or she must constantly make those, the best way to say would be to make those interpretive choices, such as negotiating the meaning, the tone, rhythm, and even the silence. That is also so important. And I discovered that aspect when I was translating these two Dutch books by Couperus, that the translator must also be able to interpret that which has not been spoken, but which is in between, which lies in between the lines. So these choices are not only shaped by structural differences between the two languages, but also by the sensibilities of the reader for whom you are translating, the target audience, let us say. So again, coming back to what Nandini had said, the translator does not merely or simply transmit meaning. That is not his or her only task. Actually, they recreate it. And this creative act turns the translation into a new work in its own right. Okay, that echoes the original, but also reflects the translator's voice. So the cultural nuances of the target language and the historical moment in which the translation occurs both become equally important. So in this sense, then, translation becomes an act of rewriting. That is how I visualize it. And the space it inhabits between fidelity and transformation is where literary translation happens. I will quote one of the most influential voices in translation theory, George Steiner, and I am going to quote his words. So he says, and I quote, uh, every act of translation is simultaneously an act of interpretation and of transformation, unquote. So Steiner's insight supports the notion that the translator exists in creative liminal space where meaning is not simply carried but also reimagined. Let me now share with you or describe a bit of my experience as a translator of Cuperus's work, what I did in Across the Luminous Realms and Other Stories. Like I said, Cuperus's style is very stylized. It is an archaic form of Dutch that is scarcely spoken today. So when I first read his books in Dutch, I thought that okay, this will take a very long time for me to even finish reading because Dutch is not my mother language. When I relocated to the Netherlands, I learned the language in the language school. But the Dutch that Cuperus had written, this is 100 years old Dutch. Nobody speaks like that or reads those kind of books anymore because this Dutch is obsolete almost. So his style is marked by, inverted syntax, if I may say, obsolete Dutch words. Even the personal pronouns that modern day Dutch uses is different than what is used in these two books. So his works have a kind of a poetic rhythm that is far removed from the contemporary usage. So as a translator, when I decided that I am going to translate these two books, I understood very early on that my task was not going to be only transpose his words into English, but I had to reimagine a world steeped in magical realism and layered symbolism. But I had to do that without diluting its complexity for today's readers. At the same time, I could not have translated it just the way he had written at that age, at that space, because that space doesn't exist anymore. And I had to see that the translations become smoothly available and smoothly readable to the contemporary new age readers. So what happens then to the fidelity? What happens then to Cuperus's original voice? How am I going to do justice to it? That was also a very, very important question which I grappled with. And I also recognized that the fidelity required thoughtful adaptation. I could not do away with the fidelity. That was not the idea. I remained faithful to his voice and vision, but I had to carefully simplify the language to make it accessible, all the while preserving the cultural texture and nuances as he has written in the original. Then this became an act of recreation. How better or how else can I then explain it without using the word recreation? So this definitely became an act of recreation, and I was kind of, inhabiting the in-between space where language, literature, and interpretation, everything came together and converged. Similarly, this experience was nothing new. I can say it was a bit more challenging because it was completely a different language, to a language which was not my own, from there to English. But but more or less similar experiences happened when I was translating the short stories by Tagore or Sharat Chandra or Munshi Premchand. Even then, I also had to make space in English for the emotional depth, the social critique, and the stylistic writing of these stalwart, the Indian prominent authors. That will be always there, because no two languages are ever sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same um, the same social reality. Let us put it like that. So again, coming back to Nandini's question, some would argue, and very rightly so, that this diversity in languages often render certain source texts, certain books as untranslatable. That is not merely a technical obstacle, but it is also a profound philosophical and cultural exchange. So, uh, that untranslatable part of the source texts, that would always be there. And I think that as a translator, I can give some examples from my translated work. Like, as I have spoken about the challenges that I faced while translating Kuberus from Dutch into English, is his books have, if you read the stories in original, you will find that he uses a lot of unspoken irony in his works. And so it was quite a challenge to bring that into English. How did I manage doing that is a question which many times many interviewers have asked. What I did was, since his work, his way of writing is very stylized, he will use very elegant words, to give that poetic feeling to his works. I tried to translate, to use similar elegant words in English, but I tried to convey the elegance of the time by using the similar kind of English words in the prose. But otherwise, I also maintained that by using those elegant words, the modern text or the translated text should not become uh, very cumbersome to read, because one of the reasons why I translated this was to make his works more accessible to the new age readers. And so that balance I had to maintain. First thing, the fidelity of Kuperus needed to be preserved. At the same time, the work needed to also be very smooth for the new age writers. This same kind of issues was also there when I was translating Premchand's Poos Ki Raat, A Winter's Night, because these stories were written in a different space, in a different time zone. When you are translating it for the new age writers, you do not only have to transpose the words and give the meanings, but also bring about that period of time through your translation. So in such situations, I believe that the translator must make deliberate choices. Whether we want to domesticate the unfamiliarity of the source text for the target audience, or to preserve its foreignness as a token of cultural respect. So yes, untranslatability of texts exist, I would say. But when I am translating, I am not looking for a total equivalence. The translated work cannot be a complete, only a mirror image or a replication. But I am more interested in looking at the translated text as transformation, and in this context, I remember a quote which Tagore once said. I will just have a look. because I want to quote and I don't want to be wrong. Uh, I think, yes, yeah. So Tagore once said, the meaning which is sought from language is in the heart, not in the grammar, unquote. And I believe is at the heart of translation. So then how do we, so which means what I have been explaining so far, it means then that the balancing fidelity, balancing the author's original voice and creative license, how much of it is allowed in literary translation, that would be my next topic then. So from so far what I have explained, we see that one of the central challenges in literary translation lies in striking a balance between the fidelity to the author, to the source text, and the creative license that is required to make the work resonate with the new author, new readers. So literal faithfulness can lead to very stiff and opaque prose. I have seen that. While too much liberty on the part of the translator also is very risky, because that has the risk of erasing the original voice of the author. So we have different approaches, the different approaches to this issue. And I think that the best is to blend these different approaches, like, for example, the formalist approach, which says that text's authenticity must be preserved. Then there is the functionalist approach that says that accessibility, which prioritizes, functionalist approach prioritizes accessibility, but then that may dilute the cultural richness. So I think the creative approach is the best one. Or maybe, in other words, I would put it like this, that in practice, I think most translators blend these two different approaches, making choices based on the text, audience, and purpose. So I would say literary translation is an art of compromise where fidelity means more than just literary accuracy. Creative license in this sense becomes essential to serve the goal of cross-cultural understanding. So this shift from national literature rooted in specific cultures and linguistic boundaries to transnational perspectives which embrace fluid cross-cultural exchanges is a profound transition. So comparative literature increasingly embrace this transnational perspective. In translating the works of Dutch and Indian author, my vision has been to situate their works in a way that modern international readers can relate to. And in this sense, I would say the role of translator is also that of a cultural curator. That is a word which I really love, because this cultural curator helps expand the literary canon beyond the national boundaries. So as I come to the end of my talk, I would, in conclusion, just say literary translation is more about honoring the multiplicity of truths. And so in making Kuperas accessible to the global audience or Indian readers, or in bringing prominent Indian authors to wider English-speaking audience, I have tried to move identities, histories, and humanities across thresholds. And this becomes very important, and this also becomes very powerful when we think in terms of comparative literature. I'm so very glad to be here today and speak to all of you and share my views, and I'm looking forward to listen to Professor Gopa Nayak's perspectives on this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for such a thought-provoking lecture. And now I would request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for her very valuable remarks. Ma'am, please.
Chaitali, I must say that it was a very well researched presentation, very articulate as expected from you. Indeed, it was very fascinating for me when you said that Virginia Woolf and Mahashweta Devi can be discussed together. This
Yeah.
is the true, yes, this is the true spirit of this lecture series, that we are not doing just comparative literature, we are doing comparative world literatures.
Yeah.
And then you said Dante with Kalidas. Yes, one can actually think about it. And even you said that Tagore would be just yet another voice in Bengal in the Bhasha literatures had there not been any translation of the poetry of Tagore. So yes, again, I would agree with you. You talked about literary translation as a passport to travel beyond boundaries. I was taking down some important points that I would ask my teachers and the faculty and the students to use them later on. And then you mentioned about prose poetry. Yes, Champu is coming up in a big way. Professor Gopa will know that in Orissa we have this stanza pattern which we call Champu. Champu is prose poetry, though it is not Odia exactly. It is from Sanskrit, I
Okay.
believe.
Mhm.
Yes, so you talked about prose poetry, then the invisible hand of the translator, and then you gave a word of caution. It was very crisp, to the point, and it was necessary. So you gave a word of caution to the translator vis-a-vis too much of liberty being taken. I like it definitely. And then you talked in favor of a creative approach to translation. I think only a good poet can be a good translation of poetry. In case of prose and fiction, probably it's not so. I'm not sure. But in case of poetry, only somebody having some poetic sensibility can be a good translator of poetry. Otherwise, they will consider bad prose as poetry. So
Yeah.
you are very right when you say that a creative approach to translation is necessary. You spoke about transnational perspectives. You are truly a practicing translator, Chaitali. You have been working with identities, humanities, and cultures. So I would congratulate you on your good work, and then congratulations to Pen Print Publisher for this book. They have done a good job. I was just having a look at the book on internet. I'm going to order some copies for my personal library and of course for the university library. So these are
Thank
my
you.
personal yes observations about you. And then well, from your lecture, we have definitely some takeaways for our university, which I think I will use when we design our syllabus on comparative literature, comparative world literature for the new MA courses. And I would recommend that our faculty take down these points. We have to talk about translation, how it bridges the temporal and the spatial distances of the different historical, many different historical periods and geographical regions. In the beginning of your lecture, you said that I am dealing with different historical periods, I am dealing with different geographical regions. That was pretty interesting. And then translation, according to you, as I am bit not exactly quoting, but I'm again transliterating you, if at all. So you talked about translation, how it acts as a dynamic conversation between past and present, between the local and the global. Then translation as cultural negotiation and transformation, that was one of your ideas. And then you said it's not a neutral act, it involves negotiating meanings, values, and worldviews. So that worldview is very, very important when you talk about any kind of translation or even preserved and transformed texts through transliteration. I'm glad that you liked the critical points, that are the questions that I gave in the beginning. You kind
Mhm.
of answered to all my questions. So that was something that connected my questions to your answers. And then you said that translation travels with power and politics.
Yeah.
They are very powerful words indeed. The translation travels with power and politics. We talk so much about body politics, about gender discourses, and translation can address all these issues with colonial histories, with imperial circuits, with global hierarchies, with power and the privilege. Translation can perpetuate cultural domination, or at the same time it can resist and subvert the hegemonic narratives. So sometimes what happens, an original text may not be able to convey one particular culture, but if
Mhm.
the translator understands that culture in a transliterated manner, then an original culture, say Odia culture, somebody can translate that to Bengali or English or some other language. If the translator has understanding of that culture, then the translator is bringing home two cultures together.
Yeah.
And then, yes, you mentioned about translation as cross-regional dialogues, then how translation allows polycentric literary systems. I so agree with you that it allows polycentric systems. And then reciprocal translation flows was one more idea that you hinted at. Translation has to be a flow with reciprocal identities or reciprocal debates. And then translation as a recreation across times, and translation as, multiple translations of one text. Ashapurna Devi has been translated by many languages, I
Yeah.
mean, by many translators
Hmm.
into English. I happen to read 2 to 3 English translations of Ashapurna Devi by some Bengalis and by some non-Bengalis, and the translations were different.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it can always be different. The author's point of view will certainly come.
Hmm.
So here, in case of translation, one has to understand how much is too much, and then I
Yeah.
would completely agree with you. The putting a word of caution to the translator for taking too much liberty, but at the same time, the translator has to take some liberty, giving footnotes or giving notes and references. So something like that. We have to actually create our own pedagogy of translation. And Hindi University is in the process of creating that pedagogy now. We have a department of translation studies, and our students are placed, very fortunately, last 5 months, some of our students have placed in central government jobs as Rajbhasha Adhikari. Paramita can give
Hmm.
you more information later on.
Hmm.
So when I came here, the students came to me, they talked about their employment and all that, and we thought about one training and placement cell, which we would be in a position to create in near future. But I was very happy and proud when a girl came to me and said, "Ma'am, today I am placed as a Rajbhasha Adhikari, and she is doing good work now."
Hmm.
Well, then the next speaker, Professor Gopa Nayak, she is a practicing translator. She has translated some very important seminal texts from Odia to English and other languages, which probably no one else could have done the way she has done. So I would pass it on to Paramita now to formally introduce and invite Professor Gopa Nayak with a request to Professor Gopa to talk about her work apart from the theoretical issues that she would be discussing today. Many congratulations, Chaitali. You did your work very, very well. I'm so happy and proud that we invited you as one of our esteemed speakers.
Thank you so much, Param. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And now I would say I'm really pleased to introduce our next very esteemed speaker, Professor Gopa Nayak, and who is currently serving as the Professor of Communications at Ramcharan School of Leadership, MIT World Peace University, Pune, Maharashtra, India. Prior to this role, she served as the director of the English Language Center at OP Jindal University, Delhi. She holds a PhD from the University of Oxford, UK, and has a diverse academic background, including a master's in sociology from Delhi School of Economics, an honors degree in psychology from Ravenshaw College, and further postgraduate studies in English language teaching and applied linguistics from the University of Oxford. Her research interests lies in English language teaching, translation studies, and cultural studies, reflecting her commitment to interdisciplinary scholarship and education. Now, I would request Professor Gopanayak ma'am for a very engaging lecture. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Paramita, for that introduction. Very generous. And thank you, Nandini. She's been a friend and a philosopher and a guide, if I can tell her. And we share a lot, though even though she is much younger to me. I look up to her. Her energy level and enthusiasm almost inspires me every day. So, going back to Nandini wanted me to talk about my translations, but I think, that being an academician, as a hardcore academician, somehow we can't get away with the theoretical or the critical aspects of translation, which you leave aside when you are translating a text as a lover of a language. So these are two very, very different roles I perform, and I think When I'm doing one, I take out the other hat. And when I'm doing so as a translator, I feel like an ODI, translating my language, my culture into English so that people appreciate the culture. That's the motto behind. But when I'm a teacher, I'm very critical about how comparative literatures should be looked at. And hence I'm kind of approaching comparative literatures. Yes, I will go into translation in that context. So basically my lecture will kind of is divided into three parts. I call this comparative literature in AI, artificial intelligence. Now you can ask me why AI, because first of all, I deal with students who use AI on a regular basis. Writing and even poetry writing has gone to AI, which is very sad. But amazingly, AI has come up with some beautiful poetry, of course, with human intervention. So now the challenge for us as academician is to not to throw away AI, but how can we use AI in a constructive and creative way so that our younger generations don't feel left out, but they feel part of it. And literature should not be given all over or handed over to AI, but that human intervention is needed. In fact, I was arguing with somebody the other day that, you know what, creativity cannot be given to machine intelligence. And they showed me this poetry which was done by artificial intelligence. As a what a lovely piece of, in fact, it was a translation of Kalijai. Kalijai is a very famous poetry in Odia. And somebody had done it by, by AI. And what a lovely rhythmic lines they have come up with. And I was myself, I know I had to take back my words. But the thing is that it's not about AI throwing away AI, but it's about how human as academicians or learners and teachers, we can, constructively use AI. The other day, I was writing a paper on the role of women in Puranas. And this has been taken about 2 years to go through the Puranas and find out the different women characters. To my utter surprise, I was talking about this to somebody, and they said, "Oh, ma'am, it's all in AI, Chat GPT." And to my utter surprise, when I put it, all my 2 years of research was there in the AI. So that is what AI has become now. So I was feeling like a fool that day that really I spent 2 hours for something that AI is giving me, ChatGPT is giving me in 2 minutes. So the thing is that now we need to learn how to use AI. So in this context, I will place my lecture, which is like a true academician. I followed the Nandini's orders and prepared a PPT. It may not be suitable. I do not know, but I still think that a PPT makes your lecture look professional. So my PPT is divided into three parts. One is the theoretical aspect of comparative literature, where I bring in all the political and the power issue, the post-colonialism, the third space, all that people have been talking about translation, and all that which looks so very redundant now, according to me. So let me share my PPT and then I'll take you through my arguments, whatever I have. So basically, I've divided into three parts. First part is the theoretical part, and next I go to the role of AI. And the last and the most important part is perhaps how in the Indian context, with a variety of languages at our disposal, and each striving to gain power, with the Bhasa coming up, with Sahitya Academy's role coming up, people have been writing about it since the 60s when it was established. But has it fall into the hegemonic thing, that the battle of languages that we fight today in India? And where is the solution? Can we achieve a symbiotic relationship between languages, which is the need of the hour, perhaps for a growing economy like India, because ultimately culture, economy, and politics, they're all connected. So we can't leave one for the other. It's very, very easy to sit in your air-conditioned room and translate a champu, as Nandini said. But at the end of it, I must think, where is my champu going, and what service is it doing to the overall nationalism or whatever role I intend it to make. So, and that's very, very crucial. Perhaps we have to kind of become very active citizens as educated individuals, first of all, that our literary products, if I may say so, are being used in the way we want them to be used. So that's a very, very important thing. Like once upon a time, Odia was not even recognized as a language, and now it's a classical language. So the journey that we have taken to make it into a powerful classical language is a journey of every Odia. And some of the Odia professors in US, they have written about Lakshmi Puran, they have written about many, many things. And Odia, Fakirmon Senapati and others, it's not about one is better than the other, but accepting the fact that India has a repertoire of languages and each language is as rich as it can be. And that is perhaps very important. By the way, I'll go emotional about it. So let me come back to my PPT to get me organized with my thoughts. And this one tech savvy thing. So I have opened my PPT. Paramita, you can help me. I have clicked on the share screen, but
There is an option for share screen. If you click it, then we will get your screen, ma'am.
yeah, but yeah, window.
Yes. Ma'am, okay. So
I'm trying, but let me. Is it okay? I'll see.
hello, ma'am.
Can
Your
you hear me?
voice is breaking. Your voice is breaking. Yes, it's visible now, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Can I continue?
Sure, ma'am. Sure, please, ma'am. Thank
So
you.
coming back to the coming back to my topic, I have named it as the relevance of comparative literatures in the age of AI. Of course, I will come to translation in terms of translation studies as a prominent feature of comparative literatures. Um, why comparative literature? Of course, it's a very basic question, but then I wanted to kind of ground it in one of the very famous quotes, which I personally like. And when I was reading about this translation studies, Susan Bassnett and others, and this one is taken from Catherine Brown, and who is quoted Susan Bassnett in terms of Matthew Arnold's definition of comparative literature, where he says that if literature is not compared, then how can we find out no single event or no single literature can be comprehended except in relation to other events, to other literature? That means if we do not compare our literature with others, perhaps it is not adequately understood. This can be a point of argument, agreement, disagreement, but it is perhaps best to ground our comparative literature in terms of why translation is needed in the discipline that we call comparative literatures. Now, coming back to the history of comparative literatures, perhaps there were people like Edward Said, cultural imperialism, and here this power concept that we were talking about, which is very much evident in um, not only in literature but everywhere else. That what is the power game? Is it is the power encroaches upon the culture, and then this imperialism that is there, are we accepting it? In that context, I think it's also very important to remind us about the English role of English in India, and that argument leads us to Homi Bhabha's post-colonial theory, where he talks about how colonialism and post-colonialism has kind of influenced literature, translation in the long, specifically translation for the 70 years of India's independent literary traditions. And of course, then last but not the least, we have Gayatri Spivak's subaltern concept. And incidentally, all these three have somewhere uh, the Indianness in them, which has perhaps led them to know about literature and language. And then we come to another aspect of comparative literature where the reader is suddenly given importance. And this is where my applied linguistic things also comes in. You know, we are taught about how the reader responds to a text, the reader response theory, the meaning in the text is dependent on the individual's attitudes and not in the text, and all these things that we see now. And in that context, there is a juxtaposition of individual and the social context, which was again brought out by Renfrew and others, where they say that literature is always positioned in the social context, which I think the previous speaker was referring to when she was comparing the literature. And of course, you know, when we are comparing American literature with Indian literature or somebody, whatever is the social context very, very important. So the individual and not find that the linguistic and philosophical contradictions which we find in the text and also in language used, you know, and translation as a translator, I always find that it is not about languages um, um, as Nandini also mentioned, that we have openness, but we have the authority to kind of play around with the concepts of fidelity and creating or interpreting these things, and where is the boundary and who sets the boundary? Is it the reader, the translator, or the author? And all these questions are always there, and here Derrida's concept has become very, very important in terms of the politics of translation and the language used. So perhaps this language aspect is very nicely taken by the AI. People develop the AI, you know, we see incidents of data labeling where we find that recently I wanted to see a movie across very much I mean, so the first time. The movie's name is Humans in the Loop, and they show that how the AI is taking only the Western concepts and Western data. Again, you know, Indian data or a tribal girl loses her identity. If you put a tribal girl in AI, they show somebody from American gypsies or something like that, whereas the Indian. So there is another kind of politics that has started with AI and translation, because AI is equipment, whatever you put in, that is what they're throwing. So now we have to be vigilant what we are into the AI and authors and translators. We all have a responsibility in kind of putting things into the AI that that are relevant and that we want to put in with a purpose, that this is the intention. And this is what I say, when AI has the capability, but it cannot have intention. Intention can only come from human beings. So that human aspect of intentions have to go into the AI from educated individuals who are doing it with a conscious purpose. Otherwise, AI will be taken over by people whom we may not want to see, and in no sooner time we will see AI is throwing at our youngsters or the younger generation or the next generation things that we did not intend to do. So the next important thing that AI needs to do is interpret meanings creatively. That is never going to be done by AI. It is human beings always who can take out meanings from, or multiple meanings from a sentence, you know. So these kind of things. So now it is So when we are translating, we are only giving perhaps one version of the interpretation. So now perhaps it's a time, like Nandini was referring to the footnotes, the explanations. So I think as translators, our job has become even more difficult in the sense that perhaps somewhere in the footnote or somewhere we have to talk about the multiple interpretations that can be done and the purpose behind those interpretations. Like if somebody is addressing, recently there was one controversy in Odia literature. There is a fiction, Randipo Anta. So Randipo Anta was going to be converted into a movie. And people did not like the title of the movie to be such because the word Randi is a very, very vulgar word and they want it to be changed. Now, there was a lot of controversy going on around it. But I, as an academician, always felt that what need to be done was it should have been the chronology of events should have been mentioned so that people could make sense of what was going on. Like they could say that it was written at a time when this word was perhaps acceptable by society. However, we have moved away from those social changes happened, and now we cannot address anyone as can be addressed as that. And people even without going into the nitty-gritty of the things, and perhaps that is where our role as it has become very, very important. Translate this word only for all the thing I perhaps do without interpreting. And if that is so, I have to give a history behind it and say that look, so it has happened. Word may mean that in that time, and it was all right to use that word, and perhaps it had a different connotation. But now in this 21st century, where India has progressed and untouchables have equal rights, or whatever we think is correct, we have to give it a meaning. And these explanations have a mandatory place in all our translations. That's what I feel. Now, apart from these written things, which are perhaps easier, the difficult ones are the one where there is an oral component like poetry or a speech, which we want to translate. And we have seen in many of these politicians speech errors that happens because, a pause or a nod can have many different meanings and many different interpretations. I don't think can ever decode those pauses in the proper meaning because it's a very, very individual. Even it varies across individuals, even it varies across cultures. So the meaning of a pause or a meaning of a wink or a meaning of a nod or a meaning of a color. uh, so those things we have to be perhaps very careful about, and that is where human intervention comes in when we are using AI. Now, coming to the next bit, Indian context. AI, I think, has a very important role to play in Indian context just because we have multiplicity of languages. AI has translated most of the Sanskrit text and interpreted them also at the same time, making things easier for a student who doesn't understand a particular language. Now, here again, these translations, are they conveying the meaning that the text intended to convey, or are they conveying a meaning that it's suitable for the narrative of the person who is following a particular ideology or a particular intention or something? And there we have to put the checks and balances. And nobody's there putting any checks and balances, at least for the time being. So the literary traditions that are there, and again, there is a hegemonic thing. Again, there is a power game there. Again, there is a struggle or contradictions of voices, whose voice matters. And there we are seeing all this coming up. which has not yet turned dirty, but it won't take time to become dirty. And now the next important thing is that thing about bhasha in English. I think Nandini knows more about it. She has been dealing with this in the folk tales and others. Of course, people have started giving importance to folk tales and oral literatures now, how they can be translated and come to the mainstream, and what service will they provide to all the learners or the general public is again a matter of thought. And to end it in a positive note, we have to be very careful that this relationship between the local, the national and the international has to be symbiotic, has to help each other. Like Nandini's concept of untranslatability. There are people who think that there can be nothing untranslatable because at the end of everything, we are human beings with feelings and emotions which are common across, which are universal. So if we hang on to this universal principle that, we are somewhere the same people, I don't think it's very different to interpret the cultures that have developed from these human beings. Of course, the transformation of these emotions or the expressions of these feelings may be different, but it is for an expert translator to make them translatable. Otherwise, we will be again living in small, narrow worlds of our own, and the literature that we are producing perhaps will not reach a wider audience for which it was meant. So, as thinking consensus individuals, I think we owe it to ourselves and to the world, our world, that we maintain a symbiotic relationship and give away perhaps the prejudices in terms of our ideologies, in terms of our egocentrism, ethnicism, whatever you call it, and perhaps maintain a holistic environment where different cultures and and thereby different literatures can thrive. That is the haunting question, is that perhaps AI will help us in doing that, because nothing is untranslatable for the AI. But however, whatever AI is throwing at us, if that has to be meaningful for us, we need to intervene as thinking consensus individuals. So my take, if I need to conclude, I would say that translation, yes, a very, very engaging pastime, not pastime, but for me, it's a pastime. Whenever I am depressed, I go into translation. It is a stress buster for me. It brings me closer to my mother tongue, my culture. And at the same time, it is perhaps most challenging because we need to think why we are translating. And if that clarity of conviction is there, then only our translation can serve its purpose, is my
Yes.
limited understanding. And that is lacking because most of the people in the politics of, translation in, let's take the example of Rusty's Midnight's Children. Can I translate it to Odia? I keep asking myself, and the answer I get is no. I love it so much in English that I cannot translate it into Odia. And at the same time, Lakshmi Purana, I don't want it to be I don't want to read an English translation of Lakshmi Purana. I will not give it to my children to read the English translation of Lakshmi Purana. I'll tell them, learn the language if you need to listen to Lakshmi Purana. At least listen if you can't read. So the thing is that there are some things which have so much of humanness in them that We need the original cannot be replaced. And yet, if we have to build bridges, perhaps translation forces us, and translation studies need to find answers for this. That what can we do? Is the originality needs to be retained at the cost of aesthetics? I do not know the answer, but AI can give us the answer. I feel I'm a believer in tech, so I feel that we need to integrate AI into our academia in so that our younger generation feels connected to language and literature. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for such an engaging lecture. Now, I would request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for her very significant remarks. Ma'am, please.
I must congratulate Professor Gopa for this very well researched and a very well thought out lecture. In fact, I found a connection between the lectures of Chaitali and Gopa. Both of them emphasized on symbiotic texts, and then they started with very, very different points, but probably their conclusions were more or less taking us towards one direction. Though Gopa concluded with a radical text, proposition that all texts need not be translated, like Lakshmi Purana need not be translated, or something like that, or you know, there's some other texts he mentioned that need not be translated. Probably some of us will differ because without the translation of that particular text, how would the others read or know about those? Though the translation will never do justice to Lakshmi Purana or Midnight's Children. There are sentences like other day somebody gave me these two sentences to translate to Hindi. I mean to English from Hindi. Someone said, गोपियों ने कृष्ण को घेर लिया कुछ ऐसे चींटियों ने गुड़ को घेर लिए जैसे. Now चींटियां गुड़ को घेर लेना और गोपियां कृष्ण को घेर लेना, there is so much of passion, so much of emotion in both these activities, and translating them to Hindi, to English would be definitely a bit of challenging. But yes, we have to attempt to make the translation, or we have to think about it. We have to give some, like in the last comments also, I concluded by giving some footnotes. Gopa's topic today was the relevance of comparative literature in the age of AI. And she talked a lot about translation. Okay, Gopa is a very hardworking person. She's tech savvy indeed, Oxford educated, and she is a tech savvy person with a human touch. And Gopa, I'm glad when I was glad when you mentioned Lakshmi Purana, the Odia Lakshmi Purana and its translation. And then also when you said no language is better than the other, I completely agree with you that languages are like sisters, no language is better than the other. And then you hinted at Matthew Arnold's definition of comparative literature, then Edward Said and the power of structure in life and literature, then the role of English in India, then Homi Bhabha's theory, then Spivak's idea of the subaltern, then the reader response theory to interpret a text, then Derrida's idea of the politics of translation. Uh, these are important things that literature students from any language should read. And then AI has the capability and not the intention. That is something youngsters must learn from us, from our generation, that AI has capability, but AI doesn't have a heart, it doesn't have the intention. Because intended meaning of a text and the convenient narrative of a translator, as Gopa pointed out, they can be very different. So youngsters, when they use AI, they should also think and rethink about the intention of an author while translating any given author through AI, by the use of AI. Human translation and AI translation will be different. But like Gopa said, some text translated from Odia to English using AI, Kalijai, the poem Kalijai, it's a very pertinent poem and it has been beautifully translated to English. I'm going to read it. So use AI, but use your editorial skills or use your brain or use your intention, your heart when you do the translation so that you can create two symbiotic texts. And then clarity and conviction of a translator is definitely required. Why am I translating? This question Gopa asked herself. I understand that she's practicing it. I had asked her in the past, what do you do when you are stressed out? She said, I just take an important book and translate it. That was something that I will never forget, because she has the clarity. She has the intention. So she has been translating. She knows that she is good at her job. So she is translating. So, from Gopa's lecture, what academic points I have taken, which I am going to use as a part of our syllabus or as a part of our research in Hindi University, I would just put those things point wise. So, the first thing was, in the age of AI-driven translation and text generation, now people are generating texts. We were writing texts. Youngsters are generating texts. So, in such a scenario, comparative literature must assert its role in critical mediation. Comparative literature can sort out the problem, solve the problem at least to some extent when texts are generated, not written anymore. Exposing the limits of algorithm universality, then foregrounding the cultural nuances, and then an embodied meaning that AI often flattens. So Gopa talked about those things. Then she hinted at AI hegemony and Indian translation battles. There is a war of translation. AI translation tools that risk reinforcing linguistic hierarchies. They privilege major global languages and dominant Indian languages like English and some other languages, while marginalizing the minor, tribal, and the regional languages. When Gopa said translation of the oral literatures, that got me into thinking as a folklorist that tomorrow, when some oral and unwritten texts are to be translated from the verbal and the oral medium to English, how are you going to go about it? I will think about it much more later. Then Gopa also talked about comparative literature scholars, how they must engage AI constructively and critically, using the AI to democratize access while resisting its tendency to erase linguistic diversity and cultural specificity. We have to think about these things. And then her another important point raised by Professor Gopa was symbiosis and not subsumption. These are the comparative theory ideas of the comparative literature theories and ideas during the AI times. Comparative literature should promote symbiotic model of language relations. It has to see, we have to see that AI is not a substitute for human translation or critical thinking, but AI is a tool in the service of dialogic multilingualism. Interlinguistic relations beyond hierarchy should be the idea when we translate texts, plurilingual texts, ethical texts, ethnical texts, oral and folk texts, and also bhasha texts. So, with these important points, Professor Gopa has substantially added to our comparative literature series here, and I'm sure that her lecture is going to create, a background or a lot of food for thought for the scholars and the researchers out there. Professor Gopa, thank you very, very much for doing so much of research to deliver a lecture in Hindi University. We are very grateful to you. Thanks a lot. Thanks to both the speakers. I thoroughly enjoyed both the lectures. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini, for putting my slides into such a beautiful story. Thank you so much. You know the art. Indeed, an honor to be here. Thank you, Pamita, and for arranging everything.
Okay.
Now Paramita and me, we will run to our farewell of the Hindi department students. So Paramita, please propose the vote of thanks, and also if there are any questions from anyone, please pass those on to both the speakers.
Yes, ma'am, sure, ma'am. Someone from the participants called Akhicha has raised her hand. If she is
Okay,
present now, she may ask.
take one question, then other
We
questions
will be,
can be made.
yes, ma'am. We'll be hello. Yes, Akhicha, are you there? I think she might having some problem. We will ask our participants if anyone has any questions. You may send it to our email address, which I have shared in the inbox, the chat box. Yes. Sorry, ma'am. It's chat box. And now, as we come to the end of our webinar today, so before we go, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Ma'am, Professor Nandini Sahu, and our distinguished speakers, Professor Gopa Nayak and Mr. Chaitali Sengupta, for their very insightful speeches, and our lovely audience for their active participation. And thank you and have a very good day to all of you. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.